History of English Poetry, Part 1. The beginnings. The beginnings of poetry. Like all other literature of the world, English literature also began with poetry. The roots of poetry extend much back that the earlier poems are lost in the mists of time. So it's a challenge to pinpoint the earliest works of poetry. In those days, there was no printing press, and hence there was no system of keeping records. And as a result, it is impossible now to trace out who the first poet was. Old English poetry, that is prehistory to the 11th century, that is the period, Old English period. It started back in the 5th century. It is believed that the earliest poems in English were written between 450 AD and 1066 AD, the time that is known as the Anglo-Saxon period. Historically, the Anglo-Saxon period denotes the period in Britain between about 450 and 1066 after their initial settlement and up until the Norman conquest, initial settlement of the Angles and the Saxons until the Norman conquest. Old English is so different from the various dialects of modern English. So it might as well be a whole other language. And it is in Old English that the earliest fragments of English poetry are found. If you look at the image on the right side, you will understand this is a piece of Old English literature. Are you able to read anything? It is totally unintelligible, right? This is how Old English was. Saint Cadman. Saint Cadman, who lived between approximately 658 AD and 680 AD, is the earliest English poet whose name is known. He was an Anglo-Saxon and he cared for the animals. He was attached to the double monastery of Whitby Abbey. Whitby is a town in England. It is said that he was a shepherd. And according to Venerable Bede, Cadman was originally ignorant of the art of song. So there's a beautiful story behind how Cadman started composing poems. Cadman, according to Venerable Bede, was an unlearned herdsman, one who took care of animals. He was so ignorant of singing that sometimes during feasts, it was a custom that for the pleasure of all, each guest should sing in turn. So during such festivities, such occasions, Cadman would rise from his table when he saw the harp coming to him. Harp is a musical instrument, and he would go home ashamed, not being able to sing. Once it happened that he did this thing at a certain festivity, that he walked away from the festivity and went to the stable to care for the horses. That was the duty assigned to him for the night. And as he slept at the usual time, a person came and stood by him. The person said, "Cadman, sing me something." And Cadman replied, "I cannot sing, and that is why I came hither from the feast." But the person said again, "Cadman, sing to me." And Cadman said, "What shall I sing?" The person replied, "Sing the beginning of created things." Cadman sang, and the next day when he told the steward of the abbey about his song, the steward took him to Abbess Hilda, who heard from him his episodes. Later, more episodes from the Latin Bible were explained to him, and he turned them into songs. This is how Saint Cadman started singing, how he started composing songs. The first complete poems to have survived to the current date are a hymn to creation attributed to Cadman. Cadman later became a monk and a religious poet. On the right side, you can see a monument to Cadman in Whitby, UK. To the glory of God and in memory of Cadman, the father of English sacred song, fell asleep hard by 680. Venerable Bede. In the previous slide, I mentioned about Venerable Bede and the story that Bede has told about Cadman. So who is this Venerable Bede? Venerable Bede, he is also known as the Venerable Bede, Bede the Venerable, and Saint Bede. Venerable Bede is well known as an author, teacher, and scholar, and his most famous work is Ecclesiastical History of the English People, and that gained him the title the Father of English History. So Ecclesiastical History of the English People is a book of the history of the Christian churches in England and of England generally. And this work gained him the title the Father of English History. On the right side, you can see the tomb of Venerable Bede in Durham Cathedral, UK. The epic saga Beowulf, it dates to sometime between 600 and 1000 AD. Beowulf is a heroic poem. It is considered as the highest achievement of Old English literature. Originally, the poem was untitled, the epic was untitled, and later it was named after the Scandinavian hero Beowulf, whose exploits and character provide its connecting theme. There is no evidence of a historical Beowulf, but some characters, sites, and events in the poem can be historically verified. The poem did not appear in print until 1815. Beowulf is a heroic narrative, more than 3,000 lines long, and it concerns the deeds of a Scandinavian prince, also called Beowulf, and this work stands as one of the foundation works of poetry in English. The fact that the English language has changed so much in the last 1,000 years means that the poem is now generally read in translation and mostly in English courses at schools and universities. It is difficult to read the original work, original Beowulf, because it was written in Old English literature. The poem was written in England, but the events it describes are set in Scandinavia. Again, it is like once upon a time, that is partly historical. Its hero, Beowulf, is the biggest presence among the warriors in the land of the Geats. Geats is a territory situated in what is now southern Sweden. Early in the poem, Beowulf crosses the sea to the land of the Danes in order to clear their country of a man-eating monster called Grendel. So he crossed the sea to the land of the Danes to kill or to clear the country of a man-eating monster called Grendel. And from this expedition, this expedition involves him in a second contest with Grendel's mother also. So from this expedition he returns in triumph. As victoriously he returns, and eventually he rules for 50 years as king of his homeland. Then a dragon begins to terrorize the countryside, and again Beowulf must confront it. In a final climactic encounter, Beowulf manages to slay the dragon, to kill the dragon, but he also meets his own death. Beowulf meets his own death and enters the legends of his people as a warrior of high renown. Legends meaning stories. Enters the stories of his people as a warrior of high renown. So here on the right side you can see Beowulf preparing to cut off the head of the monster Grendel. It's an illustration from the work Hero Myths and Legends of the British Race, published in 1910. Seamus Heaney's translation of Beowulf. Seamus Heaney, an Irish poet, is widely recognized as one of the major poets of the 20th century. He received a Nobel Prize for Literature in 1995. Seamus Heaney translated Beowulf into modern English. So this is a part from Beowulf's Seamus Heaney's translation on the left side and the original version on the right side. So this is the part where Beowulf fights with the dragon, hard by the